So you should have got an email back from me. If you sent me your field notebook, you should have got an email back from me telling me whether the link works or not. There was only one that didn't work, so everybody else that sent me a link. But just double check and make sure, because if you didn't get an email back from me, then I didn't get the link. So make sure, and also make sure that it's working. Like I said, there was one of them that didn't work. But double check and make sure that you take care of that and you do get an email. All right. Any questions? This is probably not going to be a long class. We only got one group to talk about, so we'll go ahead and get started in that. Let me move this out of the way over here so I can take a look at the screen. And of course, the only group we have left now are the mammal group, right? And that's a very interesting group, especially especially when the way you look at mammals. And I know this is kind of a strange way of doing it, but let me show you another plot. So again, we're moving through the evolutionary tree. From the left-hand side, we've got the lungfish, the amphibians, the reptiles, turtles, the lizards, the snakes, crocodilians, the birds. So those are all different kinds of reptiles. What I want you to notice, though, is if we go off to the far right, there's another critter out there that is reptile-like, and this is known as the Synapsida. The Synapsid. The name is from the fact, remember the synapsid skulls that we talked about? We were talking about this gradual trend and this lightening, holes in the skull, making the skulls lighter. So the Synapsida were another group of organisms that began evolving, began diversifying. Now, what were the Synapsid? Well, up above it says they were the non-mammalian synapsids, and I wrote in the red letters what I see them called sometimes is the mammal-like reptiles. So what were they? Well, to be honest with you, they were a group of organisms that fit somewhere along the way. Some of them looked very reptile-like, like Dimetrodon. Dimetrodon was a sphenodontid. All right. So as I said yesterday, Dimetrodon, even though that's the creature in the picture we very often see referred to as a dinosaur, was not a dinosaur. It was actually one of these mammal-like reptiles, okay? Or maybe you could call them even reptile-like mammals, depending on where you are. See, there was quite a bit of them. The Synapsida gave rise, and I mentioned these the other day, to the therapsid reptiles. Remember, the therapsid mammal-like reptiles were the ones that looked like, how far back do I got to go? The mice. I got to go too far back. It was one of the slides we looked at yesterday showing you the therapsid reptiles. I said it looked like a little rat. Looked like it had hair and everything. So that was a mammal-like reptile again. And then we go all the way up to like the Cynodontia. The Cynodon. There's a Cynodon. What a cool-looking critter, right? It's kind of a zebra, tiger, alligator-ish type thing. So that thing looks very mammal-like, doesn't it? But again, still not a true mammal, because we don't get to the mammals until we get to the part that I've highlighted with the red box, the mammalia, the three types of mammals that we're going to talk about, the monotremes, the really weird ones, the platypus and the marsupials, and then the big group, which are the placental mammals. But that's an interesting little evolutionary stair step there, isn't it? So again, what are those critters in between those Synapsida, Therapsida, Cynodontia? Until we get to the mammals, what are those? Well, they're reptiles, but they're, depending on how far along the ladder, if you will. Oh gosh, there's Aristotle. How far you move down in evolutionary time, because that's where we're going. We're going more present, right? More recent as we go up through these ladders. We see there's a gradation of different organisms. Now, of course, evolution has no goal. These were all critters that were just trying to survive, and some of them, in many cases, survive for quite a while, you know. So this was all part of that branching that we've been talking about. But what I said to start all this about this whole idea with the birds and the mammals, so here are the birds right here. To me, I've always kind of thought about birds and mammals as being two variants of the theme. Now, again, don't get me wrong. Birds are reptiles. Mammals are not reptiles. We are not reptiles, okay? And birds are reptiles, still considered reptiles. but a very specialized reptile, right, with the feathers and all. So to me, I kind of look at it as variants of a theme. It's almost like that protozoan. Excuse me a second. It's almost like the protozoans being the base for all the animal groups, right, that we've been talking about. It's like the reptiles, once we get to that point, there were this divergence between these two variants of a theme. There were the reptiles with the scales and all the things that, you know, we're very familiar with. Then there were the reptiles with the feathers, so they kind of did something very bizarre, evolutionarily speaking. They're placoids, remember, where feathers come from. They're placoids, which create scales on fish and excuse me, reptiles and all that sort of stuff. Their placoids were modified and became these structures with a lot of veins and parts coming off that became feathers, right? Us mammals, on the other hand, what we did with our placoids is our placoids became hair. Remember I showed you yesterday in that picture of the placoids, of the development of a feather, and if you remember, when you think about a baby, a chick, a young bird, the things that are going to become the feathers very much look like fur, don't they? So fur and feathers, to me, variants of a theme. And I think it's interesting, too, that both birds and mammals have some convergent evolution things that are similar, like we're both endothermic. Dimetrodon there, that's one of the reasons why we suspected Dimetrodon may have been endothermic, or maintaining an internal body temperature. That sail on the back, which is beneficial for a fish in water for stability, but Dimetrodon wasn't in water, obviously. What was the purpose of that sail on the back? They believe, paleontologists think that perhaps the sail was used to either capture or release heat. So these organisms had a way to regulate their body temperature. So if they got too warm, they could radiate body temperature through the sail. And just like we go outside, you remember that behavioral thermal regulation thing that we talked about? They could expand that sail on a sunny day to capture the sun's heat, or even use those rays that are in the sail to collapse it if they didn't want to get the sun's heat. The whole point is this organism had a way to cool off, like a sweating, right? So perhaps Dimetrodon, of course, they're all extinct, right? Perhaps Dimetrodon was already experimenting with endothermy. Now, where along this line then of these mammal-like reptiles did that really happen? Well, you could look in the literature, but I know that there has been some thought that perhaps Dimetrodon was already doing that. The birds did it too. Higher metabolic rates too, right? Birds have very high metabolic rates, just like we do. Okay, so mammals, in spite of the fact that mammals get so much attention when people look at organismal biology, they have the lowest diversity, only about 5,000 species. Remember, the reptiles were some in the vicinity of 60,000 species, 30,000 species of fish. Again, what happens in organisms as they become more specialized, right? As they become more unique in the way they are. Well, I shouldn't say that. All of them are unique. We see fewer and fewer critters as far as diversity goes, and most among the vertebrates are the small little. Most among the mammals are the small little mammals, the rodents, rats, the bats, shrews and moles, little critters that live underground. You can see evidence. We have moles and shrews here in Florida. We can see evidence in lawns. Sometimes there'll be this raised area where something is dug underground, a tunnel, almost looks like the Bugs Bunny cartoons. Your dog, with its great sense of smell, that's actually Cooper in the picture there in his nose, because I was showing his whiskers while he was sleeping. Cooper would go outside and get a scent of those critters underground and go crazy and follow all along where that little raised area is. Okay, so the big thing about mammals, of course, is hair. Nothing else has hair that isn't a mammal. By definition, if you're a mammal, you have hair. Things that look like they have hair, like we talked about in insects, that's not hair by the definition of what hair is constructed of, okay? Mammals have hair, which are keratin-rich filaments. Same thing that makes up the feathers. See what I mean? See, even look at Cooper's little whiskers there. His whiskers, now hair does all kinds of things. Cooper's whiskers, for example, are sensory structures. Cats use their whiskers as sensory structure. Our hair is something that keeps us warm. For an organism that would want to maintain body temperature like we do, just like the birds with their feathers, see? We would use hair, we would have a use for hair as insulation. Look at the picture in the middle. Do you see the tiger walking in amongst the grass? Isn't that cool? So hair's good for camouflage too, right? Especially if that were at a distance. I read some story not too long ago that a father and his son and daughter were out fishing in India and got up close to the edge of the edge of the river where the grass was like this, and a tiger came out of the woods and grabbed the father and dragged him off in the wood, or dragged him off into the brush there. It's horrible. It's amazing to think, you know, in a macabre way, to live in an area, to live in a world where when you go outside, you might actually get attacked and eaten. Porcupines, that one on the lower left-hand side, by the way, it is a myth. Porcupines cannot throw their quills, but what is a quill? A quill is a defensive mechanism. You don't want to mess with somebody that has these spikes sticking them. It's kind of like the nudibranchs in their jellyfish cells. You know how to remove porcupine quills, right? If your dog or you get hit by a porcupine quill. It's an old Boy Scout trick. Either the two, you know how to remove, or the proper way to remove a porcupine quill. So do they have porcupines in Syria? I don't know how many. There may only be a couple of species of porcupines. How many species of porcupines are there? Yeah. Let's see. Look it up real quick. Well, Old World porcupines live in southern Europe, Asia, western and southernmost of Africa. So yeah, maybe not. In the Middle East. Madison, do you know how to remove porcupine quills properly? You don't yank them out when they're stuck in, you know, you or the animal. You cut them first. You cut them, and that causes them to shrink, and it's easier to pull them out that way. So you snip them, because the porcupine quills will oftentimes come out of the porcupine. They'll shed their quills into whatever creature is dumb enough to mess with them. It's one of those things. We won't do that again. Our name, though, mammals, doesn't come from the hair. Our name, mammals, comes from this very unique structure that we alone only have, called a mammary gland, right? And we use our mammary glands, obviously, for nourishing our young, like that heart seal you see down below. Look at the content of fat in the milk. Now we're talking about organisms that grow up in a part of the world that's pretty that's pretty harsh, right? The Arctic. So the premium here is on time. You want your offspring to grow, become self-sufficient, to become, you know, to give them a better chance of surviving pretty doggone quick. So the milk it's like drinking butter, isn't it? 50% fat, causing the calf to gain 2.5 kilos a day. So that's what, 5 or 6 pounds. These animals are weaned. Now, weaning in mammals is something unique, of course, because weaning has to do with nursing. I was very interested in weaning in killer whale calves. There's a little inset of a picture there of a killer whale calf nursing on the mother. The mammary, the nipples are back towards the back end of the mom. But I was fascinated in when weaning comes about, because weaning is an interesting thing. For the young, why wean? It's a free meal. You just swim up to mom and grab something to, you know, grab a meal. But for the female, she wants to wean that offspring, because guess what? She might actually be preparing for the next offspring she's going to have. And so she's got to conserve her resources, and anything she gives away in milk is giving away resources. So it's called a parent-offspring conflict. And it's resolved when weaning occurs. So the young wants to keep nursing. Oh, no. And the mom is like, all right, time to be on your own. You know, especially I would imagine, not being female, but I can imagine once the young starts getting teeth, you're like, okay, you're not nursing anymore. But there's been documented cases in humans of cultures where nursing is done until the child is 5, 6 years old. I think if they can ask for it, they're probably a little bit too old at that point. As I said, we're endothermic. We're the 4-chambered heart. That's part of our high metabolic rate. We are thoracic breathers, all right? So we have that diaphragm. We're not buccal breathers like the amphibians were. So down below, I show you a picture of that diaphragm, which is that red thing. As it pulls down, it creates a vacuum. You don't really, how do I explain this? Air doesn't, you don't air flows into your lungs because you create a vacuum. When you pull down on the diaphragm, that the cavity that your lungs are suspended in, it creates a vacuum, and so the air rushes in to fill the vacuum. It's really kind of neat if you think about the way it works. A placenta too, big thing about mammals. So if you look in the upper right, you can see Junior there hanging upside down. The placenta is, so this is what I mean about the amniotic egg, right? There's an amniotic sac that's surrounding the baby. You can see it. There's a chorion, and actually it doesn't show it, but the chorion and the allantois have merged, and they've all become part of the placenta. Now, there's a little tiny yolk sac, right? But that doesn't provide the major nutrients for the developing mammal. It's the mother of offspring interface, the placenta. So gases are exchanged across that. You can see in the picture, the tissues actually grow together between the mother and the offspring. Kind of like what we saw in the plants. Remember the embryophytes? Ow, just bumped my elbow. In the embryophytes, you know how the female tissue grows into the seed. So this is a major thing because if you think about it, this is very protective of the young. You can carry the young, like in our case, for 9 months. Killer whale calves are about 17 months. Elephants are 2 years, 3 years. But that young can develop. So when it is born, or a word we call parturition, there's my chat box, parturition. Here's a cool word for you. Parturition, the act of birth. So when the offspring, when the female undergoes parturition and gives birth, that offspring getting carried in that placenta, being protected for X amount of time, gives it a little better chance of surviving, right? Something we've seen among all kinds of critters, whether plants or you know, fungus or anything like that. The idea of the longer you take care of that offspring, the better chance you get, especially like with the angiosperms in plants, right? Get a better chance of it living. Of course, among mammals too, you know, we tend to be smarter, us mammals, larger relative brains than other vertebrates, larger relative brains than, you know, fish and all that sort of stuff. Now, among the invertebrates, to go back for a second, I believe the consensus is that it is the cephalopods, the octopus, and the squid are the most intelligent. And of course, among the vertebrates, I suppose it would have to be the mammals. I guess we'd have to throw ourselves in the group. And then if we take ourselves out, then we're looking at the primates and the cetaceans for intelligence, however you would define that. Mammals are also known by a variety of diets, so we're known by a variety of teeth. If you look on the right-hand side, there's a few different skull examples with the teeth classified as either grinding, your molars, ripping, those would be your premolars and your canines. And then chiseling teeth. And notice in some cases, teeth become modified for something not really food-like. The elephant, the chiseling teeth become the tusks, which are used in battle, combat, defense. The beaver uses those chiseling teeth for gnawing through wood, right? Now, we use our front incisors for biting off food, and so does the dog and the carnivore up there. We don't have big pronounced canines. We have them, but the dog, which would be your typical carnivore skull, tends to have more pronounced canines. And canines in carnivores have a particular function. They're used to grab onto the prey, especially in the cats. The cats will grab their prey around the trachea, the neck, and squeeze. Oftentimes, the carcass of the animal, if human beings come across it after a kill, there'll be 2 holes in either side of the neck where the canines have grabbed and squeezed the trachea and caused the animal to suffocate. Deer have no use for ripping teeth because they're basically browsers, so they have chiseling teeth and then the grinding teeth. Same with beavers and elephants. You know, we're omnivorous, right? So we eat a variety of things. We have a variety of different teeth. We have what's called heterodont dentition, different kinds of teeth, as opposed to homodont. Killer whales have homodont dentition. All their teeth are the same, 80 conical shaped teeth. You know, our teeth are different shaped, and that's all reflective of diet. Another characteristic of mammals is the fact that we've made use of this mutualism that can occur with bacteria, so that we can consume things that normally we couldn't, especially among the grazing animals, the cows. They have those bacteria that live in their stomach that allow them to digest cellulose. Many mammals have hooves, like you see the horse hoof there. Now, a hoof is a keratin pad. Keratin, remembers, what makes up your hair. It also makes up your fingernails. So I always tell folks, if you want to get an idea of what a horse hoof is, say on you, all right, first of all, horses through evolution have actually, their legs, the bones in their feet have diminished in size. There's only one left. The only bone that really is prominent in a horse's foot is the middle finger bone. Right, the other finger bones, or the other leg bones, have become what we call these little splints right on the side of that main bone. For reasons that go beyond the scope of the class, evolution, having a very thin leg like that, walking up on the tiptoes, if you think the way horses do, is a good way if you want to run fast. All right. So anyway, what you're looking at in the horse there, when you're looking at the horse hoof, this thing, this V thing, I remember from my days of horseback riding, is called a frog. So this is probably not technically a frog, but that's the frog. So the frog, and I'm going to kind of use the camera here, is the tip of your finger, okay? And the hoof, does this pen always do this? The hoof, which is this part right here, the part that the farrier has to clip, is your fingernail as if it were thickened and then wrapped around the tip of your finger. So you see what I mean? You got that visual on that? So you're looking at the middle finger of the horse. That's the inner leg. The other bones are there. They just have become these, what they call splints. The only prominent bone is the middle bone. And you're looking at the tip of the finger or the toe of that middle bone, and the hoof is the nail wrapped around it. And hooves, of course, are protective for animals, especially critters like horses that would be, live and die by their feet. Horses, the way they deal with dealing with predators, they run or kick, right? Mammals also have horns and antlers. Now, the difference is horns are bones surrounded by this keratin tissue, whereas antlers are bone, but they're not surrounded by keratin. They fall off. The velvet, which we talk about, it looks like velvet. There's a picture on the right, if you don't know what I mean by velvet. If you look at that deer, that buck there, he's getting ready to shed those antlers. Antlers are things that are shed. Right, and the velvet is what the material that actually provides the nutrients to the growing bone, to the new antlers. So once the antlers are shed and then they're grown back, it's the velvet that actually provides the nutrients. Don't have that in horns. Horns don't have that because you don't shed them. There are flying mammals. The only flying mammals, there are gliding mammals like the sugar gliders and some flying squirrels, but the only truly flying mammals are the bats. And they can fly because of the fact that evolution has granted them, through evolutionary change, this membrane called a patagium, if you look down the left, that connects between the finger bones of the bat. See, these are the finger bones. So you got this connective tissue. Brazilian free-tail bats, and Brazilian bats, many bats don't have a real obvious tail. This critter does. And some bats have a tail that's connected. They'll actually be like, if that's the tail, there'll be tissue coming off of it. But this is the free-tail. This is a very common Florida bat. Not very big. They're maybe, smaller than your fist. I've seen them flying around my backyard all the time, Brazilian free-tail bats. These critters are fantastic because they use echolocation. The same thing that cetaceans use. They use sound, sonar. They put out sound impulses which bounce off of things. I was running late one night and had a headlamp on because it was dark. And I guess where I was running, some insects had sort of started to gather the light in front of me. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, from right behind me, a bat came swooping in. It was obviously popping down, trying to grab some of those insects that had gathered in the light. Really cool. Eat animals. Flying rats, my buddy used to say. Okay, so back to mammal evolution, kind of picked up where we left off with the reptile. So we got these synapsid, extinct reptiles, mammals, right? I wrote extinct reptiles, so there are synapsid reptiles, they've gone extinct. And then in this group of the synapsid, there are these things that led up to, and eventually we have the mammals. And all this happened during the dinosaurs. It wasn't a matter, again, of the dinosaurs dying off and then the mammals. It wasn't, we don't have this sense of replacing critters after extinctions. They're always there in many cases, or they're there already. After an extinction, they sometimes get an advantage because, you know, an extinction wipes out maybe a dominant group, like the dinosaurs were wiped out. That's when the mammals begin to rise to prominence. All three groups, the monotremes, the platypus, the marsupials, and the placental mammals, the regular mammals, right, the ones you're most familiar with, were all around by 140 million years ago. So that's so the dinosaurs are 250 to about 50 million years ago, so 60 million years ago. So during this time, during the dinosaur time, the mammals were around. Now, as I said, after the mammals went extinct, they underwent this adaptive radiation. I hope you remember that, what that is from our early chapters, right, where a bunch of species arose probably through cladogenesis because the dinosaurs released a very strong environmental pressure. During the time of the dinosaurs, evidence suggests that the mammals, right, were these small little shrew-like critters that lived up in the trees. They were arboreal. That's what that word means. They ate insects, so they're insectivores, and they only came out at night. Came out at night because it was safer at night than it was during the day running out, you know, amongst the dinosaurs. Now, again, how do we do a little detective work? How do we know they were nocturnal? Well, in the fossil evidence of them, we see very large eye sockets. Large eye sockets, large eyes. Generally, it's because you're trying to process low light levels. It's like telescopes. Larger the telescope, the more you can see in terms of resolution because it gathers more light. There's a couple of synapsid reptiles up there. So I start with this one up here. This is a more like a therapsid, and these are a couple cool ones I found. Look at those. Aren't those neat? Now, you think, well, how do they know the colors and the stripes? Sometimes in fossilization, a little bit of the actual tissue will get fossilized, and sometimes they can actually get a sense of the color or the markings. Biarmusucus, and I like the other one, Pristerognathus. It's like a dog with, you know, one yawning there. How cool if we could, you know, say, I mean, you know, Jurassic Park would be neat, but it wouldn't be neat to see these critters too, right? Okay, now, big thing that happened between reptiles and mammals. Reptiles can hear, even grasshoppers can hear with their tympanum that we talked about, but mammals hear much better. And so it's kind of like this whole thing about the eye. You know, what do you see with an eye spot? What do you see with a pinhole eye? What do you see with a camera type eye? It goes from light to obviously objects. So it's kind of the same thing with sound, right? So it's the resolution of the sound. Do you just hear, you know, basic frequencies, or can you discern sound? If you think about us, in our cases, you know, language. You guys are doing it right now. We're discerning sound. So let's talk about how that happened. Well, it's interesting because there is a physical reason behind our ability to be so hear sound so much better. If you're looking in the right, I've got a picture of a skull, all right, in the top, and that is going to be your typical reptilian skull. And a few of the bones have been color coded for you: the articular, the quadrate, the dentary, and the squamosal. Now, again, I'm not real concerned with you memorizing the names of the bones. That's not the point. But what I want you to notice what's going on with those is, look down below now. The one on the left is a present-day reptile. This is the ear construction of a present-day reptile. They have an eardrum. They have the stapes. The stapes is the hammer anvil, the stirrup that we learned about in school. Remember, we have 3 little bones in our inner ear. Present-day reptiles only have 1. Here's what happened back in evolutionary time. Sometime in the past, some synapsid reptile, back at that joint of the jaw. Remember how I said snakes can disarticulate their jaw? Their jaws are very loose. Well, if you think about it, the more bones in that joint, the looser the jaw would be. So already we got this propensity for some reptiles to have this loose jaw. So as we move into mammals, here's what goes on. A couple of those bones that were involved in the jaw joint, specifically the one in the green and orange, the quadrate and the articular, those bones actually migrate into the inner ear and become the malleus, the hammer, right? And the incus, or the anvil, and then the stapes. So having those combination of those three bones, see, I've connected the arrows together. So those jaw joint bones had nothing to do. It's kind of like the skeletal rods or the gill rods in fish. Remember how we talked about where the jaws come from? The front bony structures that held up the gills, a couple of those, the front ones, became modified. It became jaws. Same thing's going on here. We're modifying a couple of those jaw joint bones, and it becoming the inner ear of mammals, which allows them, because you have those three bones instead of one, it allows them to have much better precision in terms of hearing. So again, it's like the eye thing. This still happens, by the way. This migration of the bones into the inner ear, this still happens in mammalian embryos. They can actually track it during mammalian development in an embryo. The bones start off in the jaw. It's almost like showing us a little synopsis of what happened back in evolutionary history. And then during the embryonic development, they migrate to the middle, and they become the malleus and the incus. So mammals have some really sort of unique adaptations, and that's good, but of course that also is a downfall in many cases, because some of them, with their very specialized demands, have suffered habitat destruction, and their diversity has declined quite a bit in the last 15 million years. And there's no coincidence why in the last 15 million years. Well, a lot of it has to do with human beings coming on the scene during that time. It's more habitat destruction that we cause, the more impact we have on present-day mammals. Speaking of that, let's look at the three groups of mammals. All right, as I said, there are three major groups: the monotremes, the marsupials, okay, and then the eutherian, or the placental mammals. And the ones that you probably know most is the placental ones. You might know the marsupials, right? That's the opossum. And the monotremes you may have heard of before. The monotremes, I always think, my gosh, this must have really blew people's mind when they first went to Australia. The European scientists, they get, mammals have hair, give birth to live young. Now there's some variants of that theme for the most part, but they don't lay eggs. Oh yes, they do. Monotremes lay eggs. They're oviparous. There's a picture of a couple of platypus eggs on the top, look like little jelly beans. I don't know what that coin is, but it's probably about the size of a dime. They're not very big. Monotremes do nurse their young. There's a picture of a female with a couple of female platypus with a couple of, I don't know what you call young platypus. All right, and they're actually nursing, but there's no well-developed nipple. Actually, what happens, there's glands that secrete milk onto the skin, and the young basically lick the milk off. So there's no nipple, no concentration of that kind of tissue. Just like in the the frog, right? Oh gosh, it wasn't the frog. When did we discuss the cloaca? Cloaca. Yeah, we were discussing frogs. The cloaca. Did we do it? No, we have to talk about the cloaca on Monday. A cloaca is an opening, a common opening for the digestive, the urinary, and the reproductive system. Literally, cloaca comes from the Latin word which means sewer. Now, if you think you're trying to get an idea, monotremes have a cloaca, frogs have a cloaca, the shark has a cloaca, fish, amphibians, reptiles. We don't have a cloaca. If you're thinking, with the idea of the female, again, not all of those three things open in the same area, even in the female, right? Okay, but monotremes do. Now, the significance of that is cloacas are found in fish and amphibians and reptiles, and not in mammals except among monotremes. So monotremes are some very reptilian, or the most reptilian-like of all the mammals out there. Australia and New Guinea, mostly because of the fact that these animals are very, very specialized, and they have very specialized requirements. In Australia and New Guinea, for the most part, because of where they're located, they're in islands kind of a step away from the mainland. These critters, until humans, have been, for the most part, isolated from the rest of the world, and they can survive in these rather bizarre sort of ways of making a living, these bizarre kind of critters. The thing in the upper right is a spiny anteater, or an echidna. That's another monotreme. Okay, another smaller group, but one that you probably have heard of, are the marsupials. Marsupials are named marsupials because the pouch, and yes, opossums, this is the brush-tail possum. See a little embryo nursing there. But the pouch is called a marsupium. Even the possums, which is our only North American marsupial, by the way. Our only North American, we used to have a lot more, but they went extinct. North American marsupial is the opossum. They do all have a pouch. They all have a marsupium. Viviparous, so they don't lay eggs. They have a short-lived yolk placenta. And then the young continues to develop in the pouch. All right, now what we mean by that and how that differs or how that fits between monotremes and the rest of the placental mammals is I always say, tell students that marsupials deliver their young half-baked. They're not quite finished yet. I mean, they're not necessarily finished when we deliver our young. They can't survive on their own, but they're not as far along developmentally. So the monotremes lay eggs, right, and go with that. The marsupials, what they do is, like, for example, in the kangaroo, the female kangaroo will deliver the little joey, the one that's sticking his head out of the pouch, and then the joey is going to crawl his way up the fur and get inside of the marsupium, because not only is the protection inside of there, right? But the nipple, like you saw in that brush-tailed possum, that's inside the pouch as well. Okay, so that's what I mean by being, you know, half-baked. The young, it's a short-lived yolk placenta, right? And then that young has to continue development. Again, a really specialized type of mammal that would be subject to environmental perturbations. So again, you're going to find them in areas that are, you know, kind of distant, like Australia, South America. South America had a lot of has a lot of marsupials too. The other group are the ones that produce the true placenta, right? So this allows for, this takes the idea of the marsupial and goes further. So we deliver a much more well-developed young, better chances of its survival. And I guess among the mammals, that must have been a real key to survival, because among the eutherian mammals, we have this rapid diversification about 60 to 100 million years ago. And among the mammals today, the extant one, most of them are eutherian, the placental mammals. So that would include the lioness there, and of course the dolphin. We all know, of course, that dolphins, whales, porpoises, all those are mammals, right? They have hair at some time in their life. Young killer whale calves, young dolphin calves will have rostral hairs up around their nose, which they lose later on in life, but they do have it. Remember, like those characteristics of chordates, mammal characteristic, one of them is hair, at least at some time in your life. So if your dad's gone bald, he's still a mammal. Okay, kind of like with the birds, I have a couple of groups of mammals I want to point out. I've already pointed these two out too. The monotremes, which lay eggs, the marsupials, which use a marsupium. But among the placental mammals, the sirenians, the manatees, and the dugongs, they've lost their hind limbs. So these are organisms, once again, these are examples of critters that have secondarily gone back to the water. Manatees and dugongs, manatees, if you don't know what dugongs are the Australian version of a manatee, are related to land-dwelling mammals. It's that secondarily moving back into the water. Same thing that dolphins and whales did as well. Sirenia, the name Sirenia for the manatees comes from the fact that some of the early sailors that came to this part of the world from Europe thought that manatees looked like, I guess to them, mermaids. And in the story of Odysseus, Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, there is the sirens who sit on the rocks and lure the sailors to get their ships to crash on the rocks. And these sirens were mermaids, and I guess being out at sea quite a while, a manatee ended up looking like a mermaid to these guys. Whew, that's a long time at sea. I've been at sea a while, but not long enough to think a manatee looked like a mermaid. They didn't care that much about looking like a mermaid when they ate them, though. They were very popular to be eaten. The lagomorphs, the rabbits, the hares, and the pikas. I'll show you what a pike is in just a moment. Lagomorphs have hind legs much longer than the forelegs. Here's a pika. There's a pika right there. There are no rabbits with teeth like this. There was a movie I saw as a kid one time about these giant rabbits that attacked and killed people. I always think it's so funny to think, just the idea of giant rabbits. A horror flick about these rabbits attacking people. There's a dugong. This is a dugong right here. This is a Steller sea cow. Another wonderful story about human beings. Steller sea cows were alive up until 18th, 19th century. Extinction, primary cause of extinction was human beings. Human beings hunted them. And there's manatees. There's manatee. The biggest group, like we said, are the rodents, the rodentia. They have these the teeth in the front, these chisel-like teeth that continually grow. That's why squirrels, beavers, rats, those kind of critters, mice, continually have to chew. There's the world's biggest rodent, by the way. That's a capybara. This is your typical wharf rat sitting on the line of a ship. If you've ever been down, to the pier, let's see if I can draw a boat. Here's a boat attached to the pier. The line, that's not bad, Steve. There's a line coming off of there that ties it to the pier. On that line, there'll be this funnel-shaped object. That's a rat guard. Rats will crawl up the lines and get aboard ship. Rats are just one of those things about on ships. And these guards are a way the rat crawls up the line and then can't get past the guard. Although I've seen plenty of rats crawl. There's a little opening right there, crawl through it. So they're pretty clever. So that's the rodents. Oh, the primates, of course. The big thing about the primates is going to be the opposable digit, right? The ability to actually close that thumb. Here we go. Opposable digit. To close that thumb over the palm of the hand, which in the case of human beings allows us to use tools. Now, there are critters out there, chimpanzees that use tools, many other species of monkeys that use tools. Even remember Darwin's finches. We talked about using tools, but among primates, having that opposable thumb, especially like I said, I always tell my students, try spending a day without using your thumbs. See how difficult it is to manipulate and grab things and hold on to things. The carnivores, the dogs, the wolves, the bears, and the cats, these critters here, the artiodactyls, the cetartiodactyl, the artiodactyl specifically, the bighorn sheep, and the cetaceans, the whales and the dolphins. So whales and dolphins are related or mixed in with this group of organisms that includes the sheeps, the pigs, critters with even numbers of toes. So there's a deer track there, so you can figure out right away that a deer is an artiodactyl. Again, the question, or at least the evidence shows us that cetaceans, these mammals, did the same thing like the sirens did. They secondarily went back to the water. That there was a mammal that lived on the edge of the water and made its living probably fishing or capturing fish, and eventually through time, we talked about this in the evolution chapters, gave rise to these organisms that spend all their time in the water now, the cetaceans. So the paleontological and the genetic evidence suggests that when we look among the mammal groups, which ones are whales and dolphins more closely related to? Well, it includes those organisms. It includes, for example, the cow. The cow is an even-toed organism, an even-toed ungulate. See, the horses that we talked about, odd-toed. Remember I said the horses, it's only one toe. So odd-toed ungulate, the horses. Then even-toed would be like cows. Deer, that sort of stuff. So cetaceans actually more closely related to the hippopotamus than anything else. But among the big groups of mammals, it is the even-toed. So cows and dolphins are kind of related. Dolphins are probably better swimmers. So the artiodactyls are the even-toed. The perissodactyl are the odd-toed organisms. So again, that's going to be the things like the horses, the zebras, and the rhinoceros. The chiroptera are the bats, right? The flying ones, and then the big group are the shrews and all that. So check out some bats. There's 13 species of bats here in Florida. If you're ever out in the woods and you're walking along and you see these things, these are bat houses. They're used to help bats give a place to roost. That's what they are. Now, the ones down below, we are not in Florida. That's a big bat, the giant crown, a golden crowned flying fox. That's found in the Philippines. That's a good-sized animal, right? Can you imagine walking out in the woods and see that flying by you? Now, luckily, many bats like this are, like this one in the picture, are fruit eaters. So It's a scary looking organism. What I think is cool in the picture where she's holding it up, you can see the finger bones. Like there's one of them right there. There's one right there. And this particular one, what happens, like the back legs, that's where the patagium attaches to. Pretty efficient way to fly, man. All right, last two slides very quickly. I am not an anthropologist, so my knowledge about human evolution is limited. I didn't take anthropology classes, but of course, it's no surprise, I'm sure, to any of you to realize that we fit into this big, huge, family tree of organisms that are evolving and changing through time. So if we go back in time, a lot of, all of our ancestors and relatives are no longer around. The only hominid, what is the word I just said? Hominid would be human primates. The only one still around, the only one extinct, opposite of extinct, are these guys, the Homo sapiens, right? The last ones to die off before us would have been the Neanderthals. It's a German word, so the TH is T, not TH like we say it. And then this is a new group of Floresiensis. Gosh. Discovered in the fossil record from Indonesia, a group of smaller hominids, human-like organisms, but something that lived relatively close to us. And then even newer than that is Naledi, Homo naledi. So we're adding parts to the human family tree, as we move along. And of course, you can see it's the same thing where there's no goal to evolution, different critters. Like down here, we have these distant relatives of organisms. Now, these all died off. So about 6 million years ago, this is what we consider for the most part would have been, some of the earliest hominids or humans. About 3 million years ago, there was an organism known as Australopithecus afarensis. So Australopithecus, that's the genus. And one of the more famous ones is one that we've nicknamed, or was nicknamed, Lucy. This is Lucy. This is what they found of Lucy in the upper right in Ethiopia in 1974. Lucy lived about 3.2 million years ago. And Lucy may have looked similar. Lucy is an afarensis, so we think Lucy looked like something down below. Now, remember, we talked, one of the things that was occurring at the end of the dinosaur era into the present era was the drying of the climate. And again, when climate's dry, it creates deserts and all those things we talked about, but also trees begin to diminish in abundance. The wetter the climate, the more trees you have. That makes sense, right? So as the environment on Earth began to dry off, began to cool and began to dry off, the trees began to die. So organisms typically spent their time in the trees, like many primates or arboreal critters. There would have been an evolutionary advantage for perhaps coming out of the trees, because for one thing, as the trees died off, and then you moved down onto the ground, there might have been some resources down there. Now, moving out on the ground, one of the things that you would have been beneficial would have been able to be bipedal. Now, Lucy wasn't completely bipedal, so the critters in this picture weren't always bipedal, so they alternated between, kind of like maybe a gorilla, maybe less like a gorilla alternates, but nonetheless alternating between 4 and walking up on 2, quadrupedal and bipedal. One of the reasons, or some of the evidences to suggest that Lucy at least spent some of her time being bipedal, is at the back of your skull there's a hole. It's called the foramen magnum. So if you take A and P, it's the hole that your spinal column goes through. Well, in organisms that are tetrapods, the way their heads are arranged, the foramen magnum is more towards, if the eyes are facing this way, the foramen magnum is more opposite of the eyes, right? Whereas in human beings, the eyes are this way, and the foramen magnum in our skulls points down because we're walking that way, right? When we stand up, we turn our head 90 degrees. So Lucy's foramen magnum, again, it's part of that detective work. When they look at the skull of hers and other organisms of this group, they see that foramen magnum has begun to shift underneath. So they believe that these organisms spent at least part of their time being bipedal. Now, modern human beings it didn't arise till about 200,000 years ago. So that is Homo sapiens there. but critters were already walking erect on a regular basis about 2 million years ago. So just about, where is it? Homo erectus. Here we go. Homo erectus, the erect man. Somewhere around that time is when we believe that human beings begin to walk upright on a regular basis. Another a bit of evidence to suggest bipedal locomotion is the Laetoli footprints on the left-hand side. These are so cool. These are fossilized footprints of a hominid walking, of this kind of hominid, this Australopithecus here, these Lucy types, and looking at these footprints. Amazing to think that these things could get fossilized and preserved. Look at these footprints. People study this stuff, and Gates can tell these organisms were walking bipedal. I read an interesting article a while back in a runner's magazine and actually substantiated it, looking at some of the physiology and some of the anatomy. Human beings are actually more efficient as runners, as bipedal organisms, that a lot of other organisms are as quadrupeds. We may not be able to run as fast, but we can run for a very long period of time. So since we would have hunted in packs, right, social creatures, being able to run long periods of time would be beneficial, because you don't got to chase the creature forever that you're trying to chase down. But if you had relays of humans that could run a distance, you could switch off between these humans. As you got tired, someone else picks up the chase until finally the poor critter just slows down, and then you get it with a spear or whatever, right? Okay, any questions on that? All right, so no, we're done. I'm going to post we're just going to talk about that. I'm going to post an announcement. We will have lab on Monday. It will start at 1. I'm going to post this an announcement on Blackboard, but no, we're done with lecture. That's it. No more lecture material. So Monday we come in, we do lab at 1. Tuesday we come in and do the lab practical at 1. And then Thursday, so Wednesday we won't have anything. I'll be online during this time if you need to talk about anything between 1 and 2:30. But then on Thursday we get together at 1 o'clock and have your final. Okay? Madison, you have any questions for me or anything?